Well, I am Ori Givens, as was said. I'm from Spectrum News One. It's a statewide news station here in Columbus. So if you haven't heard of us, check us out. We're at spectrumnews1.com. And I'm really excited to be here with the founders of Equality Ohio. Equality Ohio, we're celebrating the 15-year anniversary of this amazing organization. And I hope to, over the next 30 minutes, talk about some of the things that have happened over those past 15 years with the people who made them happen. So joining me on this call today, we have Tom Grody, we have Lynn Bowman, Chris Geidner, and Erica Merritt. I hope I got everyone that's on. Thank you all so much for joining me for this wonderful event.
Thank you for having us.
Hello.
So I'd like to give everyone a moment to just say who they are, tell us where you're joining us from, since we're in this socially distanced live stream event. And since it's Pride Month, tell me what makes you proud. Well, Chris, how about you? Tell us who you are and give us your pride. What is pride to you? And tell us where you're calling from.
I am Chris Geidner. I'm here from Washington, D.C. today, and I was back when Equality Ohio was founded. I was finishing my last year of law school.
Lynn Bowman, coming to you live from Ostrander, Ohio, somewhere in the woods between Delaware and Marion. Founding executive director, and very, very lucky to be one of the 62 people who were in the basement of King Avenue United Methodist Church back on, I think it was April 24th, maybe, of 2005, in recovery mode from the marriage amendment in 2004. And currently, I'm working at the Human Rights, I had to think for a minute. I'm working at the Human Rights Campaign now as our Deputy Director for Campaigns.
Tom Grody. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in German Village with my husband and my two beautiful children. And I thank Equality Ohio and all of you and Jim Obergefell for the fact that I was able to co-adopt my children, which is the first thing we did after marriage equality passed. We ran down to the courthouse and co-adopted our children.
So last but not least, I'd like Erica to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Merritt, and I am a organizational development consultant in Cleveland, Ohio. I am really excited to be here with all of you, and you asked about what makes us proud. So I am proud to have played the tiniest part in supporting the start of this organization.
So first, I'd like to start out with 15 years ago. I'd like to know what was the scene like back then? And Tom, I think I'd like you to kick it off and talk to me about what 2004 was like, especially, dealing with the fact that the state just passed a law that made it really difficult for your family to exist.
Well, we were pissed, right, everybody? We were just pissed. We felt like, I know that we talked to, in our early meetings, we all commiserated together, but I think we all felt like we were kicked in the gut. And I think where the vision came from, where we all feel at home, is we did not feel at home. And so I think, and it was hurtful. It was hurtful to feel as though our neighbors and family members, in some cases, literally voted to ensure that we could not marry the people that we love, which is just one of the most basic things that we all deserve. So we were pretty mad, weren't we, Lynn? I would say that's where we were. And then what I'm most proud of is that a group of folks, and Lynn, I hope we spend enough time crediting you for the groundwork that you did, which was enormous, traveling the state, and Lynn literally was working full time and traveling the state, talking to folks to try to ensure that we needed to start an organization that was staffed and funded. We'd never had one in Ohio, and we deserved it. I think we felt like we deserved that. And Lynn literally she put on thousands of miles and drove across the state because she said, you know what, this is not going to be a Columbus thing. This is going to be a statewide thing. And so she really worked to connect folks, because people were pissed off all over the state. And we needed a way to come together. And I credit Lynn for putting on the miles to to connect folks to get into that basement to start the work.
I remember sitting, thank you, Tom. I remember sitting in my living room with my wife, Nancy, and Googling gay Chillicothe, gay Portsmouth, trying to find anything. You know, this was 2004, 2005, so the internets weren't a big thing then. Trying to find anything out there to find folks in these smaller areas, because we knew it couldn't just be the 3 C's either. We talked about, you know, it can't just be the 3 C's. It has to be the entirety of the state, as many people as we can find, so that we have buy-in and we can all work together, because it's not just the 3 C's where change needs to happen.
I mean, the reason why somebody like me was there was, I think there was also like a very cognizant idea that sort of we were very much ahead of a lot of the country of like making sure to get, I was actually a younger person at that time. And I remember I literally came from our like last day of law school. Like we were outside taking our like picture up at OSU, and I left that and went to the church basement. And it was having people there. Like I had been out with Move On the fall before, doing GOTV the day of the election and the marriage amendment. And so, I mean, it was right from the start, it was not just statewide, but it wasn't just only like people who had been involved in other efforts. It wasn't just people who had like statewide leadership experience. There was an effort to sort of bring all ages and groups into the conversation right from the start.
I think that's actually a great connector to how I ended up there. At the time, I was working for an organization called NCCJ here in Cleveland, and there was outreach to NCCJ saying, you know, we are having this convening and we're trying to launch this organization, and we're looking for people who believe that this is important and are willing to show up and help us do the work. And so it felt important. It was a small way that I felt like I could help. And so I got in my car, which was probably a bit of a beater at the time, and drove to Columbus in order to be there and to be a part of that moment of the creation of this really important organization.
And it was a crazy weekend because most everybody didn't know each other. Like even some folks in the same cities didn't know other people who were there from that city. And yet like focused, super duper focused, 36 hours, and we slept a little bit, I think. Chris and Tom didn't, but super duper focused and productive, and like the energy behind it, everybody wanted something to come out of that weekend that was going to be real and true and representative of the whole state. And our entire movement. And it's just incredible to me to think of what was achieved over that 36-hour period from a disparate group of folks.
Well, and partially because it was so powerfully facilitated. Like that is one of the things that still sticks with me is even the process of getting to those things that you're describing was phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that first weekend. I want to dig into kind of when you got through it, what were the big things that you said, this is where we're going? Obviously, marriage equality was that big thing, but what was the strategy?
Well, we actually, can I answer that, guys?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we actually left the weekend with a group of people who were committed to like this founding, not board, but founding work group. And they were from all across the state, and they had a charge that was developed raise $100,000 in 90 days to prepare to launch the organization and create a board during that period of time and hire an executive director. They were all these things were laid out. It was a very clear goal statement from that group of 60 some people who were in the room. And there were, 10 of us, Tom?
Yeah, and it was great because as part of the organization, what I loved about it, it was action oriented. So we did the values work was critical, right? What are our shared values? You have to start there. And that was the bulk of the work, frankly. And then it was the development of the vision mission, which was an all-nighter, but all with the input. And then it was, we need a plan. We're not leaving here until we have a plan. And part of that was dividing the state up, to 10 different areas and getting a representative from each one of those areas. And then after that, with a charge of certain action items. And then it was meet weekly by phone. And then there was a retreat. And I think the whole group was relentless, and we felt like we didn't want to let down that group of 60. Would you say? We didn't want to let them down because people traveled from all over the state, and we were committed to that work. So we weren't going to let them down.
And in those 90 days, that group of people identified 2 different boards of directors, one for the 501c3, one for the 501c4, had incorporation paperwork filed for both organizations, got the C3 status and the C4 status not only filed but approved, raised $100,000, and hired an executive director, all in that 90. Oh, and wrote the bylaws for both organizations, all in that 90-day period, while almost everybody had full-time jobs.
I'm curious, Chris, when you look back at that time period, especially thinking of it from a legal standpoint, what was the most pressing thing? You know, we had just seen codified into the state constitution a ban on marriage. What was, thinking from that policy standpoint, really, what was the strategy?
As great as sort of where we are today feels in some ways, in terms of what we could and what we wanted to do, where we were at the start was so powerful because the success was us all getting together. Like, the success was that an organization was forming, and literally every action above that was a success because it hadn't succeeded previously. And I mean, the fact, like, if you had told any of us that we would be on a 15th year anniversary event, we would have laughed at you, I think. Like, even if we were being honest with ourselves, we wouldn't have been like, well, we had a great weekend. We'll get something out of it. Maybe we'll repeal this amendment. But like, I mean, I think the goal was to make the state better. The goal was, we don't think that what happened last fall represented who this state was if everybody across the state was actually organized and knew who we were. And so all of the steps that could be taken to change that reality were going to make the state better. And like, obviously, like, repealing the amendment was a big part of that. But there were all of the steps before that. There were steps with safe schools. There were I mean, I remember, like, that first summer, I think there was an issue about safe schools that we were like working on legislative language and talking with lawmakers. And so it was this idea that, like, just like having a voice that would constantly be pressing back organizationally against people who were very organized against our lives would be such a surprise to the state that it would change the outcomes. And I think we've seen that it has.
Man, our launch event on October 1st down at the State House was just incredible to have folks there, to see the organization launch, and to be able to film that, to then turn it around a couple months later when Rod Parsley, pull a name out of the history books there, had his rally on the State House grounds with Ken Blackwell, And we had Ted Strickland across the street at the church at the same time talking about peace and love and belonging. And Parsley's over there talking about hate and separation. And to be able to take all of that and put it out there visually in video. We had some great folks who worked on that pro bono for us. And to Adam Shapiro, actually up in Cleveland, to put it out there so that people could actually see, this is the difference. This is what we're talking about. This is what we believe in, and pull them in with us was really powerful in that first, 6 months.
Just people weren't expecting it, and people weren't expecting it, and it just totally it was so unusual to see a consistent, organized voice presenting this alternative vision. I think, Tom, you wanted to talk a little.
Oh, I was just going to say, and just that. So the group was called Reformation Ohio with Rod Parsley, and I think it's easy to forget now what a threat the religious right was very much focused on our community, and they were trying to pass laws against us. They still are. What I have found is, I think what we have found is they go for the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. So a lot of that energy has shifted to our transgender community now. But it was, pedophiles or trying to get your kids. It was all of it. And legislators were afraid to meet with us. Legislators were bought into that rhetoric at the time. And Rod Parsley was on the charge. He was Reformation Ohio. So we had a threat in front of us, and we did have two clear visions, and it was awesome to make that distinction for folks.
And if you want to see the video, it's on YouTube, and it's called Two Visions for Ohio. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah.
It's timeless.
I'm curious, Eric, I'd like to come to you kind of from a perspective as an ally and looking at this fight. Back in 2005, it was important to have a team just as it is now to get some of these things done. I'm curious to know what your perspective was on the climate back then around LGBTQ rights and what that meant to be an ally fighting for this.
Yeah, when Gwen asked me to do this, I started thinking a lot about that time and why did I at that point feel like it was so important to be an ally and to be present when I was invited to be in Columbus. And honestly, in many ways, it came down to a relationship. So when I started working at NCCJ, I had a partner that I started with on the exact same day, who his name is Aaron, and Aaron and I, we were sharing an office, so we were either going to love each other or hate each other. We decided that we were going to love each other, thank goodness, and we had what I would describe as a really transformational relationship, in that I feel like I expanded his views exponentially around race, and he expanded my views exponentially around sexual orientation. And up until then, I would have described myself as very open. But my sense, for example, of what homophobia was thinking of something like Matthew Shepard. I did not understand the daily experiences until, and I mean, I still can't say that I fully understand them, but I wasn't aware of them until Aaron and I started to share stories with each other about our experiences. And it really opened my eyes. And then to understand, for example, the numbers around suicide for LGBTQ youth, and to have a chance to work with young people and to hear their stories and their experiences of rejection from their families, and the way in which that has and still does drive both homelessness and entry into foster care. And so those were some of the things that through that relationship I became much more aware of. and really started to understand how important it was to not just be open, but to actively push against those things. And to also understand that in large part, for lack of a better description, there's a shared, the people who are not going to be on the line for LGBTQ plus folks are not going to be on the line for Black folks and people of color either. And so I felt like, and still feel like, there's so much opportunity for us to be in coalition, in relationship, in connection, to be finding ways that our interests converge and to be partnering together. So those were some of the things that it was very personal for me.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of those personal connections, those personal relationships, whether we're talking about race or LGBTQ life or gender, any of those things, it's those personal sharing of information, of experiences, I think that helps to further. I mean, I think that was really a lot of what gave successes to this movement. So I kind of want to talk about that work to, since that event at the State House that you all put in place to help get some of the wins that you were able to achieve over the next several years. So I want to talk about what that agenda was, first, Lynn, and what were those big wins that you got, especially, leading up to Obergefell and the biggest win so far that we've seen in government.
Yeah. So when we actually dug into the work and wrote our goals and did all of that, we had a house because we live in Ohio where everyone feels at home. So we're very visual people. And in each of the windows, we had the various pieces of legislation that were important to us. Hate crime, safe schools, non-discrimination, adoption, and then marriage was up here at the top. And we figured timelines on all of those things. Marriage was supposed to be 10 years, which we hit. It wasn't because of us, it was because of Jim and the Supreme Court, but we hit 10 years on marriage, which was really cool. But so we had that, but to me, our very first real win legislatively was in February of 2006. The Ohio House passed or was considering voting on a bill that would ban LGBTQ people from adopting. And our Speaker of the House at the time, John Husted, who is now our Lieutenant Governor, happened to be adopted himself. And because he knew that story, he knew the importance of adoptive families, he did something that was very outside of the norm for elected Republicans at that time, and he stopped that bill. I think we were all astounded that had happened, that he had the courage to do that. It was really the first act of legislative courage that we had seen on LGBTQ issues in Ohio ever. And we honored Husted at our very first lobby day, which happened in March, just a month later, during our reception after our day of lobbying. So that to me was our very first, it was not as much anything that we did as it was somebody else having the courage to step forward and set an example for what legislative courage could look like.
And having benefited from that win or block, because part of winning is blocking bad stuff. Here I have 2 adopted children today, and that is because of the work of Equality Ohio helping to have those conversations. And I want to add that, one of the things that I think is most been successful about Equality Ohio is their shared value. And I just went back and reread some of those. And one of the things it said is to give everyone a chance to be an ally. And I think that is powerful today too. Give everyone a chance to be an ally. Now, that doesn't mean they will, but it does mean that you give them a shot. And it was about conversation and advocacy, and doing that with love, and doing that without demonizing. And it was hard sometimes, I think. But that was the Husted conversation, right? And there's been, I bet you Elena could list off a dozen or two folks where they've had those types of conversations and changed hearts and minds.
Yeah, we actually had our shared values. We had two columns, and one was instead of X, we will Y. So instead of demonizing, we will love, or whatever. I don't remember all of them, but we will not be victims was one of them. We won't frame ourselves as victims. And holding true to those shared values really formed all of the communications that we put out, all the emails, all the fundraising pieces. Anytime we talked at events or anything like that, it was all framed through that lens of our shared values.
How difficult, I'm curious, was it to, I don't want to say to form those ideas, but thinking about what was the focus, were there any other things outside of marriage that were being looked at? And was it all really about just getting that marriage right when you're thinking about the organization?
No, it was hearts, minds, and laws. And you can't change minds unless you change hearts. You can't change laws unless you change minds. And we did a lot of work in all three areas, lots of educational stuff, and lots of lobbying and that type of thing. But really the bulk of our work was around changing hearts.
If you would have told us that after 15 years, we still couldn't get that stupid ENDA or Fairness Act through Ohio legislature, it is infuriating. And that the Supreme Court decision we just had will be 5 years after the marriage decision. No, we put marriage far out because we thought that was a pipe dream. And then we couldn't get non-discrimination through that Republican House. And God bless Equality Ohio, because year after year after year, they brought the most diverse, wonderful voices to the State House to testify over and over, and they still wouldn't do it. And we still have that work to do, but gosh darn it, they should be embarrassed and ashamed.
Yeah, it's passed the House when the House was held by Democrats, when Strickland was in office in 2009. The Ohio House passed it. That's the only time it's ever even gotten a vote on the floor. If there were more Republicans in Ohio who had legislative courage like John Husted did in 2006, that bill would pass if they were willing to actually stand up and do what they know in their hearts they support, but they're not willing to take the risk.
It kind of reminds me of what happened in Reynoldsburg this past week. They were able to pass the 31st non-discrimination bill there, and the reason that they were able to do it because there was a shift in their politics. They had a shift in their council and their leadership. So it just shows you the power of local politics. It shows you how their vote, even in that community, can change things for the future.
There were 14 local municipalities who had non-discrimination protections in Ohio when we started Equality Ohio in 2004. 14. Less than 18% of the state's population was covered.
Wow. I want to talk a little bit about where we are now, because we're getting close to being out of time, and it's been so amazing to hear all of these stories. But we're in another period of social change. We're in another period of fighting for rights. And now we're looking at a place where, in addition to fighting for justice based on sexual orientation, we really are shifting focus to fighting for justice based on gender identity and refocusing on fighting for justice based on race and ethnicity and immigrant status and some of these other protected statuses. How can Equality Ohio use the power that it gained in this traction for LGBT equality and marriage equality to help our trans brothers and sisters even more? And I know there are lots of clinics and things like that, but to really help to raise the bar on how our community sees trans people, queer people, trans people of color. How can we aid this fight in racial justice that's happening right now?
In 2007, when ENDA was an amended ENDA was brought forward in Congress, and they dropped gender identity out. The boards of Equality Ohio passed a resolution that the organization would not support in any way legislation that could but didn't include gender identity. And Equality Ohio, I think, based on what I've seen from other state organizations across the country, has really held true to that vision and that embracing of our trans siblings for the entirety of the organization's lifespan. Particularly over the last 5 years, Elena's leadership in this area has, is that Sophie? Has been just absolutely incredible. Her team really embraces that piece of the work, and it's critical at this moment that we stand up even louder for our trans siblings, particularly trans women of color.
I think there's something about really holding the idea of, sorry about that.
No problem.
Holding the idea of intersectionality and remembering, right, that we are all holding multiple identities as we move through the world. And that I will speak for myself. I feel like I have a responsibility in the places that I have privilege, whether that's resources, whether that's social capital, whatever that is, to extend that in the places where other people may not have that, where I can amplify or support the voices of folks who are often not listened to. So when I think about that intersection of race and being transgender, or gender nonconforming, and frankly, the murder rate, some of what we're seeing happening across Ohio and happening nationally, it's despicable. And it shows up, everything from people being misgendered in the media, right, when the crimes are being described, to obviously not getting the attention that those stories not getting the attention that they deserve. Humans should not have to prove their humanity. No human being should have to lay themselves bare to prove their humanity. And so the ways in which we can use our platforms and our connections and our relationships and our resources to send that message and to amplify the voices of the folks who are least often listened to, I think that's part of our work.
I'd like to share two quick things. One is Lynn Bowman. At the time Equality Ohio was founded, the transgender part of our LGBT was really coming of age. Lynn insisted that we have trans board members, and worked very hard to educate some folks that really needed it. Frankly, I will never forget some of the education that took place on that board. Secondly, Equality Ohio has, the last few years, has been a leader and on the anti-racism front. I would attribute that to the board. I would attribute that to Elena and Siobhan and others. But you've really helped lead the way and educate and set a standard for the rest of the state. So I want to thank you for that, because I personally have benefited from learning from you on this. I have more to learn. It's a different time, and I thank God it is, because we have a lot more work than maybe some of us realize.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for that.
I think
just go ahead for just a moment.
I think from a national perspective. Yeah, I think from a national perspective, I think just looking at what has happened in Ohio, looking at the fact that I feel like this Pride Month this year has been so unexpected at every moment, obviously, and really coming into this month with seeing Pride protests that truly are sort of getting back to the original spirit of Pride, and really are focused on achieving justice where people are seeing a lack of justice today, is is a way of really putting our money, our efforts, our time, our energy to back into a spirit of where it's needed. And to see that 5 years after marriage, when there were so many stories being told that like, oh, the LGBT movement will just end now that they got married, nobody will care. And while there might be some people who have become less active, I think what we've seen this month is that there are far more people who are willing to be more active, more intersectionally dedicated to improving the world. And it's just, I mean, it's just been tremendous to see.
Absolutely. Well, go ahead, Erica.
I was just going to say, what you just spurred for me as we're talking about sort of the intersection between these movements. You can't have this conversation without naming the reality that even the movement for Black Lives, right, is an intersectional movement founded by largely queer women, queer Black women. And so that just struck me and felt important for me to say out loud that, while all of the issues are obviously not the same, I'm not trying to conflate them, but I do think that there is a convergence, and in that convergence, there's so much opportunity.